Hello everyone. In today's lesson, we will review the past perfect. Okay, so remember the past perfect is one of the most challenging concepts within verbs. So you really need to review this concept. And as we mentioned in the theory, the past perfect is made up by the auxiliary had plus a past participle. Okay, so we have two common uses of the past perfect. The most common use, which is about 80% of the cases, is the first one. A completed action before another action in the past. In other words, the past of the past. That simply means that one action ended before another action in the past. As simple as that. For example, I could say, I had studied for the GMAT when I saw you. So first, I studied, I finished studying, and then after some time, I saw you. Okay, so the action of studying ended before I actually saw you. Maybe I studied from 7 to 8, and I saw you, I don't know, at 10 p.m. Okay, so that's the first meaning. Now the second use usually appears in more challenging questions. We don't have two actions this time. We have action 1 and then an event in the past. The event in the past could be a time period. Okay, usually it refers to a time period. And a lot of times you have the word by. So for instance, I could say I had taken the GMAT. So had taken is the first action. And then by July of 2019, it is not really an action, but it is a time period in the past. So that means that I took the GMAT, and then it was July of 2019. But the action of taking the exam happened before July of 2019. Okay, that is very important to understand. Okay, so let's use these concepts with real GMAT questions. Let's begin with question number 1. Notice that here you have some buildings that were destroyed and damaged in the earthquake last year were constructed in violation of the city's building code. Okay, so my subject is some buildings. Then that were destroyed and damaged in the earthquake last year is a modifier. And the main verb is were constructed in violation of the city's building code. But notice that here the main verb is in the simple past, were constructed. Okay, so that doesn't make sense because the construction should have happened before the buildings were destroyed and damaged or damaged. In other words, first, you need to construct these buildings in violation of the city's building code. And because of that, when the earthquake arrives, then those buildings are destroyed or damaged. Okay, so look at the splits at the end. Remember, have been is present. I cannot use present perfect. Okay? Because the action ended before another action. So I need had been. I cannot use were. You can eliminate 3 choices because of that. Also, I cannot say they were destroyed and damaged because one is the extreme of the other. You are either destroyed or damaged. Okay? So between B and E, the only difference is the position of last year. And that's an important difference. This deals more with modifiers. Notice that if you have last year here, that last year is part of the modifier that were destroyed or damaged in the earthquake last year. Okay, so what happened last year? They were destroyed or damaged. However, if you put last year at the beginning, that describes the main verb. I could say, last year, what happened last year? Well, last year, some of the buildings that were destroyed or damaged in the earthquake had been constructed. So what happened last year? They had been constructed. And that's the wrong meaning in this particular context. So we want to leave the original intention, and that's why B is the best answer. Okay, so let's take a look at something a bit more difficult. For example, notice that in this question, you have a modifier at the beginning. Less than 35 years after the release of African honeybees outside Sao Paulo, Brazil, what happened? The subject is their descendants, and the verb is had migrated. So the main verb uses the past perfect. And what is the meaning of that? So let's do a timeline, and let's say that these honeybees were released right here. Okay, so the release occurred in this period. Let's say that this is now, this is the present. And it says that less than 35 years after their release. Okay, so again, the release was here. And from here, you have 35 years. Let's say 35 years. Oh. But less than 35 years after the release, so probably here, what happened? They had migrated. Okay, so here the event is 35 years after the release, but the action of migrating occurred before those 35 years. Okay, so we have the second use of the past perfect, an action that ended before an event. What was the event? The full event would be the 35 years from the release up to 35 years later. The migration occurred before the event, before the 35 years were completed. Okay, that's why A works. Okay, so A is a good choice. It explains the right idea. Notice the other options. You have since releasing, since honeybees had been released. And remember that, as we saw in the verbs theory, if you have since plus a time period or an event, then you cannot use past perfect. What do you need? Well, you need present perfect. Okay, so I cannot use B or C. Now, what about D or E? Well, look at that it at the beginning. What is the referent of it? It took less than 35 years. What took less than 35 years? The same thing happens in E. It does not have a referent. Okay, so A works. But a lot of people ask me, how could A be correct if there is no other action in the past? Well, the truth is that there is no other action in the past, but you have an event. Okay? So let's take a look at another challenging question. Here, you have the modifier at the beginning, according to some analysts, and the subject is the gains, right? The gains in the stock market reflect, that's a verb, reflect growing confidence that the economy will avoid. Confidence that the economy will avoid. Notice the split at the beginning, that versus in, that versus in. This is a very common split that I like to call that versus preposition. The most common prepositions are in, on, at, of, okay? There are many others. And in general, if you are between a that clause, so if you have that subject plus verb versus a preposition, most of the time you'll notice that the best answer uses that. Okay, so that the economy will avoid works perfectly fine. Now, you don't have confidence in the economy to avoid, that is not idiomatic, or the economy's ability, well, the economy cannot really have ability. Maybe the economists do, but not the economy itself. So, using the expression confidence in the economy to avoid is not idiomatic. You could have confidence in the economy, but not in the economy to do something, okay? So, C is wrong, D is wrong, B is wrong. It's either A or E. Okay, so the big question is, can I use this past perfect had feared, or should I use was feared? Well, it depends. Actually, if you're referring to earlier this year, both could work. There is something else in this question. For instance, in E you have with it instead coming, and that's a misplaced modifier that should be touching the economy. Okay, A is parallel because you have will avoid and instead come. Will avoid and come. That's parallelism. So what's the issue with the past perfect? Well, nothing. A works. A was the best answer. It is wrong because of the misplaced modifier and also that passive voice was feared earlier this year by many. So you prefer A. Now what is the meaning of the past perfect there? It says the economy will avoid the recession that many had feared earlier in this year. Well, notice that earlier in this year is what? It is a time period. So remember, you can use the past perfect to express the idea that something finished before another time period. In other words, many had feared the recession. When? Well, at some point before earlier in this year. Okay? That's what it means. You could also say was feared earlier this year, but the meaning is different. Okay? If you use simple past, okay, was feared, which is also passive, it means that the action occurred at a very specific moment in time. But if you use had feared, it means that the action of fearing finished before another event or time period. Before what? Well, before earlier in the year. That's basically it. So A works, and that's basically it. Remember, you can use past perfect in two situations. To express that one action ended before another action, or to express that one action ended before a time period. Okay, so I hope you learned something new, and if you have any questions, you can email me to teachers@gmatduos.com. I'll see you soon. Have fun.